The metallic blue 1967 Mustang Fastback sat in our garage like a sleeping giant, its chrome gleaming under the fluorescent lights. For 3 years, I'd poured every dollar from my part-time job at Henderson's Auto Shop into that car. Every weekend, every holiday, every spare moment had been dedicated to bringing her back to life. I called her Eleanor after the car in Gone in 60 Seconds, and she was more than just metal and engine to me. She was my future, my freedom, my pride. At 17, I'd bought the rusted shell for $800 with money I'd saved from mowing lawns since I was 14. The seller, an old man named Frank, had looked at me skeptically when I showed up with crumpled bills, but something in my eyes must have convinced him I was serious. "She's got good bones, kid," he'd said, patting the fender. "But she'll need everything else." He wasn't wrong. The engine was seized, the interior was destroyed, and rust had eaten through parts of the body like cancer. But I saw past all of that. I saw the car she could become, the car she was meant to be. My boss, Jim Henderson, had taken pity on me and let me work on her in his shop after hours, teaching me everything he knew about engines, bodywork, and restoration. "Cars like this," Jim would say, his weathered hands guiding mine as we rebuilt the 289 V8. "They're not just transportation. They're dreams made real, but only if you're willing to put in the work." And work I did. 60-hour weeks during summer breaks, every paycheck funneled into parts and paint. I'd researched every component obsessively, hunting down original pieces at swap meets and online auctions. The Shelby GT 350 style stripes weren't cheap, but they were perfect. The Magnum 500 wheels cost me 3 months' salary, but they transformed the entire look of the car. My parents had been supportive, if not entirely understanding. Dad would occasionally wander into the garage, beer in hand, and nod appreciatively at my progress. "Looking good, Marcus," he'd say, though I could tell he thought I was crazy for spending so much money on an old car. Mom was more practical in her concerns. "Just don't forget about college savings," she'd remind me regularly. "That car won't get you a degree." But they didn't understand. Eleanor wasn't just a hobby, she was my ticket to somewhere better. I'd planned to drive her to California after graduation, maybe get a job at one of those custom shops in Los Angeles where real artists worked on million-dollar restorations. The car was my portfolio, my resume, my everything. My sister Chloe, 2 years younger and perpetually focused on her social life, had never shown any interest in my project. She'd complain about the noise when I worked on weekends, roll her eyes when I'd excitedly show the family some new part I'd installed, and generally treat Eleanor like she was just taking up space that could be better used for something else. Which is why what happened next felt like such a complete betrayal. I came home from my summer job at the shop on a Tuesday in July, sweaty and exhausted, but excited to install the new carburetor I'd finally saved enough to buy. The garage was empty, not just clean, empty. The workbench was there, my tools were there, but Eleanor was gone. My heart stopped. I ran into the house, my boots echoing on the hardwood floor. "Mom!" I shouted, panic rising in my throat. "Where's my car?" She was in the kitchen, making dinner, and the look on her face told me everything I needed to know before she said a word. Guilt mixed with defensive anger, the expression of someone who knows they've done something terrible but is prepared to justify it anyway. "Marcus, sit down. We need to talk." "Where is my car?" I repeated, my voice cracking. Dad appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes, his face grim. "Son, we had to make a difficult decision." The story came out in fragments, each piece landing like a physical blow. Chloe had been caught cheating on her SATs. Not just cheating, she'd been part of an organized scheme where students paid someone else to take the test for them. She was facing criminal charges, possible jail time, and certain expulsion from school. But there was a way out, an expensive way out. The lawyer says he can make this go away, Mom explained, her hands shaking as she poured herself a glass of wine. But it costs $25,000. We don't have that kind of money. So you sold my car? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You sold Eleanor? We got $30,000 for it, Dad said, as if that was supposed to make me feel better. Jim Henderson found us a collector who was very interested, said it was a beautiful restoration. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Jim, my mentor, the man who taught me everything, had betrayed me too. You went behind my back. You sold my car without even asking me. You're 17, Mom snapped, her guilt manifesting as anger. You don't own anything. We're your parents, and we make the decisions in this family. But the money, I started to say. We'll save your sister from going to prison, Dad interrupted. Family comes first, Marcus. Always. You'll understand when you're older. I looked at both of them, these people who were supposed to protect me, who were supposed to support my dreams, and felt something fundamental break inside me. What about my college fund? What about my future? You're smart, Mom said. You'll figure it out. Get scholarships, take loans. But Chloe needs help now. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. 3 years of work, countless hours, every penny I'd earned, gone just like that, to bail out my sister who'd made a stupid, selfish decision to cheat rather than put in the effort to succeed honestly. But it was more than just the money or even the car. It was the message my parents had sent. Chloe mattered more than I did. Her mistakes were worth $30,000 of my dreams. My future was expendable if it meant protecting hers. I made a decision that night. If my parents wanted to treat this as a business transaction, then that's exactly what it would be. Chloe owed me $30,000 plus interest, and I was going to collect every cent. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen where my family was having breakfast, acting like nothing had happened. Chloe was there, looking guilty but relieved, probably thinking the worst was behind her. I want to talk to Chloe, I announced. My parents exchanged glances. Marcus, Dad started, what's done is done. We need to move forward as a family. Oh, we will, I said, sitting down across from my sister. Chloe, you owe me $30,000. She laughed nervously. What are you talking about? The car they sold to save you from prison. That was my car, bought with my money, restored with my labor. You benefited from the sale, so you owe me the money. That's ridiculous, Mom interjected. We're not going to. I've already talked to a lawyer, I lied smoothly. Family or not, what you did was theft. You took property that belonged to me and sold it without my consent to benefit someone else. I can either pursue criminal charges and civil litigation, or Chloe can agree to a payment plan. The room went silent. Dad's face was turning red, and I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. They'd just spent $30,000 to keep Chloe out of legal trouble. They couldn't afford more legal fees, especially not if I was serious about pursuing this. You're bluffing, Chloe said, but her voice wavered. I pulled out my phone and showed them a contact I'd added. Mitchell and Associates, attorneys at law. Another lie. It was actually Pizza Palace, but they didn't know that. Try me, I said calmly. The argument that followed was epic. Mom cried, Dad shouted, Chloe accused me of being vindictive and cruel. But I held firm. I'd done the math in my head already. $30,000 at 5% annual interest over 6 years, the length of time it had taken me to save for and restore Eleanor, came to just over $40,000 total. I'll give you a break on the interest, I said generously. $35,000 payable over 5 years, $7,000 a year. That's very reasonable. We don't have $7,000 a year to spare, Dad protested. Then Chloe better get a job, I replied, because one way or another, I'm getting my money back. It took 3 days of family warfare, but eventually they capitulated. Not because they thought it was right, but because they realized I was serious about involving lawyers and courts. Mom drafted a payment agreement on her computer, and we all signed it, making it official. Chloe was furious, but she was also scared. The cheating scandal had already been hushed up thanks to the expensive lawyer, but she knew that any more legal trouble could unravel everything. She had no choice but to agree. The first year was the hardest for her. She'd never worked a real job before, always relying on Mom and Dad for spending money. But suddenly she needed to earn $7,000 while still maintaining her grades and preparing for college applications. She took a job at the local movie theater, working nights and weekends, barely earning minimum wage. I felt no sympathy. She'd made her choice when she decided to cheat rather than put in honest effort. Now she was learning what honest effort actually looked like. Meanwhile, I threw myself into work with renewed determination. I picked up extra shifts at Henderson's, took on freelance mechanical work, and started buying and flipping used cars with the small amount of savings I had left. Every dollar I made went toward my new goal. Not just replacing Eleanor, but building something even better. Jim Henderson had tried to apologize, explaining that my parents had convinced him they were acting in my best interest, that I'd agreed to the sale. I'd accepted his apology, but made it clear that our relationship was forever changed. Trust, once broken, couldn't be fully repaired. The second year brought new challenges. Chloe was in college now, and the burden of earning $7,000 while maintaining her studies was crushing. She'd lost weight, developed stress-related health problems, and her grades were suffering. My parents begged me to reduce the payments, to show mercy. Did she show mercy to my dreams? I asked coldly. Did any of you? By the third year, something unexpected started happening. Chloe was thriving. The constant pressure to earn money had forced her to develop discipline, time management skills, and a work ethic she'd never possessed before. She'd been promoted to assistant manager at the theater, had started tutoring other students for extra income, and was excelling in her business classes. "You know," she said to me one evening as she handed over that year's final payment, "I hate what you're doing to me, but I understand why you're doing it." "Do you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I took something from you that you'd earned through years of hard work," she said quietly. "I benefited from theft, essentially. And now I'm learning what that work actually feels like." It was the first time she'd acknowledged what had really happened, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a recognition that she was finally understanding the lesson. The fourth year marked a turning point in our family dynamics. My parents, who had initially been angry at my vindictiveness, began to see what I'd seen all along. Chloe was becoming a different person, stronger, more responsible, more empathetic. The spoiled teenager who'd thought cheating was an acceptable shortcut was gone, replaced by a young woman who understood the value of honest effort. But I wasn't done yet. I'd spent 4 years rebuilding my savings, and Eleanor's replacement was nearly complete. This time, it wasn't a Mustang. It was a 1969 Dodge Charger RT, complete with a numbers-matching 446-pack engine. I'd found her as a bare shell and built her from the ground up, learning new skills and techniques that made my first restoration look amateurish in comparison. When Chloe made her final payment at the end of year 5, the entire family gathered in the living room. She handed me a cashier's check for the remaining balance. She'd worked overtime for months to pay it off early. "There," she said, exhaustion and relief evident in her voice. "We're even, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook just yet. Actually, we're not quite even." Her face fell and I saw panic flicker in her eyes. My parents tensed, probably preparing for another battle. "You still owe me one thing," I continued, pulling an envelope from my jacket pocket. "What?" she whispered. I handed her the envelope. Inside was the title to Eleanor, the original Eleanor, my 1967 Mustang Fastback. "I bought her back," I said simply. The story came out then. I'd tracked down the collector who'd purchased Eleanor, a wealthy businessman named Roberts who lived 2 hours away. For 3 years, I'd been visiting him every few months, admiring the car, building a relationship with him. He'd known my story. Jim Henderson had told him everything, and he'd been impressed by my persistence. When I finally had enough money saved, I'd made Roberts an offer he couldn't refuse. $45,000 for a car he'd paid $30,000 for. He'd accepted, not because he needed the money, but because he respected what I was trying to accomplish. Eleanor was in even better condition than when I'd lost her. Roberts had barely driven her, keeping her in a climate-controlled garage and having her professionally maintained. She was perfect. "She's yours," I said to Chloe, handing her the keys. "Consider it a graduation gift." Chloe stared at the keys in shock. I can't accept this. This is your dream car. This is Eleanor." "Eleanor was the dream of a 17-year-old kid who thought the world was fair," I said. "I'm not that kid anymore. And this isn't the same car anymore either. She represents something different now." "What?" Chloe asked, tears streaming down her face. "Justice," I said simply. "You worked for 5 years to pay for your mistake. You learned what effort and sacrifice actually mean. You've earned redemption. But I wasn't finished with my surprises. Besides, I don't need Eleanor anymore." I led them all outside to the garage, where my new project waited under a car cover. With a dramatic flourish, I pulled the cover away, revealing the completed Charger in all her black and orange glory. "Meet Athena," I said proudly. "Named after the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare." My parents stood there in stunned silence. Dad was the first to speak. "Marcus, I owe you an apology," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What we did to you was wrong. We were so focused on protecting Chloe from the consequences of her actions that we didn't consider the consequences for you." "We stole your dreams," Mom added, tears in her eyes. "And you turned that theft into a lesson that saved your sister's soul." It was true. The Chloe standing before me was nothing like the selfish, entitled teenager who'd thought cheating was acceptable. She was strong, hardworking, and principled, qualities that never would have developed if she hadn't been forced to confront the real cost of her actions. "I don't forgive you," I said to my parents, and I saw them flinch. "But I understand you. You made a panicked decision to protect your child, and it cost another child his dreams. That's not something I can forgive, but it's something I can accept as the imperfect choice of imperfect people who love their children." Over the following months, our family dynamic continued to evolve. Chloe and I developed a relationship we'd never had before, one built on mutual respect rather than sibling rivalry. She understood the value of hard work now, and I understood the power of accountability. She kept Eleanor, but she earned the right to drive her. She paid for her own insurance, her own maintenance, her own gas. When she graduated college, summa cum laude with a degree in business ethics, a field she'd chosen specifically because of her experiences, she drove Eleanor to the ceremony. My parents and I found our way to a new understanding as well. They never again made major decisions affecting my life without consulting me, and they supported my decision to open my own custom restoration shop after college. Henderson's had taught me the technical skills, but my experience with Eleanor and the family crisis had taught me about business, negotiation, and the importance of standing up for what's right. The shop became successful beyond my wildest dreams. Clients came from all over the country, drawn by word of mouth about the young restoration specialist who treated every car like it was the most important project in the world. I hired Jim Henderson as my lead mechanic when he decided to retire from his own shop, and our working relationship healed over time. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of the whole experience was watching Chloe flourish in ways she never would have if she'd been bailed out without consequences. She started her own consulting firm, helping companies implement ethical business practices. She married a good man who valued her work ethic and integrity, and when they had children, she made sure to teach them that actions have consequences and that taking shortcuts rarely leads to real success. Years later, when Chloe's oldest daughter turned 16, she came to me asking about cars. "Uncle Marcus," she said, "Mom says you're the person to talk to about finding the perfect first car." I smiled, thinking about the lessons that had brought our family to this point. "Well, that depends. Are you looking for something easy, or are you looking for something that will teach you who you really are?" "What's the difference?" she asked. I led her out to the garage, where Eleanor now sat alongside Athena and several other project cars in various stages of completion. "An easy car," I said, "gets you from point A to point B without any effort on your part. But a project car, a car you have to work for, sacrifice for, and pour your heart into, that kind of car teaches you about patience, persistence, and the value of honest effort." "Like Mom learned?" she asked with the perceptiveness that seems to run in our family. "Exactly like your mom learned," I confirmed, though hopefully without the family drama. She spent the next hour examining each car in the garage, asking technical questions that reminded me of myself at her age. Finally, she stopped in front of a rusted 1970 Plymouth Cuda that I'd been meaning to work on. "What about this one?" she asked. I looked at the car, another shell waiting for someone with vision and determination to bring it back to life, and then at my niece, her eyes bright with possibility. "That one," I said with a smile, "is going to teach you everything you need to know about who you really are." And as I began explaining to her what restoration really meant, the time, the money, the frustration, the setbacks, and ultimately the triumph, I realized that the lesson Eleanor had taught me wasn't about revenge at all. It was about justice. Real justice doesn't just punish wrong actions. It creates opportunities for growth, learning, and redemption. My parents had stolen my dreams, but in forcing them to confront the consequences of that theft, I'd helped create something better than the original dream. I'd helped create a family that understood the difference between fairness and favoritism, between protection and enabling, between love and accountability. Eleanor had been just a car. But the lesson she'd taught us all, that actions have consequences, that dreams have value, and that sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we need most, that lesson was priceless. As I watched my niece run her hands along the Cuda's faded paint, already planning her restoration project, I knew that Eleanor's real legacy wasn't the revenge I'd extracted or even the justice I'd achieved. It was the understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the full consequences of their choices, and then be there to support them as they work to make things right.